Bismillah Rahman Rahim. My friend and a very hard-working advisor, Mr. Amin Aslam, advisor to the Prime Minister on climate change, Mr. Shen Zhang, IUCN President, Dr. Grethel Aguilar, IUCN Acting Director General, Ms. Kabraji, IUCN Asia Regional Director, Ma Ke Ping, Mr. Amjad Rashid, my friend Javed Jabbar, distinguished guests, ladies and gentlemen, and delegates from all over the world. It's indeed a pleasure to be here at the closing session of the 7th Asia Regional Conservation Forum of International Union for Conservation of Nature. Pakistan is a very diverse country, a very biodiverse country with a lot of wealth as far as nature is concerned. In the north, we have forests, we have mountains, we have glaciers, then we have very healthy plains, and in the south, we have oceans. And it is a matter of very great concern to Pakistan, to the region, to Asia, and then to the world that the climate is changing, and there are environmental costs of the footprint of humanity is getting bigger and bigger, and it is crushing the world as we know it. I believe that the efforts which are being done are very important, but at the same time, we need to convince the people. We need to convince the people who make decisions, and that comes, and the progress will happen through the new generation as well. And I'm sure a lot of you must have heard of Greta Thunberg and the way youth are taking the baton from the people of the older generation and talking about a better world which has to be left to them. It was a pleasure, indeed a pleasure, when Mr. Amin Aslam mentioned the fact, and it reminded me that I went out to schools and I distributed these pencils to maybe about 100,000 children. And it was a pleasure to talk to them, because from there, I believe, when we talk about nature in Pakistan, about cleanliness, I believe it is the children whose attitude towards the world they live in has to be changed. And I used to tell them, is it hot? And they would say, yes, it is hot. And I asked them which is the natural shade which you see around, and they would talk about trees. And I would tell them there's only one factory in nature, almost predominantly. There's only one factory in nature which takes in carbon dioxide and sequesters carbon in its body and liberates oxygen. That is the trees. And that is why I wanted them to start planting even small vegetables in their houses, to understand the beauty and the need for being able to do that and turning Pakistan green. And therefore, I'm very impressed by the fact, I have been impressed by the fact that our Prime Minister, when the discussion in Pakistan, the dialogue in Pakistan was only politics, he talked about the billion tree tsunami, and he found a very vibrant gentleman in Mr. Amin Aslam to take it forward, and were able to implement the billion tree tsunami. Thank you very much. And then the future of a 10 billion tree tsunami for Pakistan, and to make Pakistan green in that respect. There are many issues recently, and the recognition of the fact. First, let's talk about the recognition of the fact, which I believe a lot of more work needs to be done. Because either there is ignorance, or there are vested interests in the world which do not want to recognize what needs to be done. Both those things are very important. And therefore, the Paris Accord, and it was sad to hear that one major country withdrew from the Paris Accord. And I believe that is where politics and the needs of countries have to match with the needs of the world in the future. I was very surprised by the fact that I was recently reading a book on astronomy. Most of you would know Stephen Hawking, and his last book is Brief Answers to Big Questions. His first few books, you remember, is A Brief History of Time, and he talked about black holes, the expert in black holes. And I didn't imagine that by the end of the book he would raise very important questions as far as humanity is concerned. One of the questions, of course, doesn't concern you, but the fact that our chemical algorithm takes 10,000 years, for example, for even minor change, and the new artificial algorithms are very fast to change, and therefore humanity is threatened by its own creations unless it is able to manage it well. But that is something which does not concern this organization and the people sitting here. At the same time, then by the end, he talked about global warming as a threat, a serious threat to humanity, and the fact that this human race may not survive these kind of threats. And that alarms me when people and big thinkers have put negative marks on a situation where people may not survive. And then he talked about population and the fact that the needs of the population have to match the production or the ability of the earth itself. You see, there are two possibilities. Either limit your population somewhere where you can manage. If you allow it to grow and you can't manage the necessities of the population as the earth gives its fruit and which you eat from it, in all respects, not eating for your own physical well-being, but the eating means that you live on this earth. Either you manage the population or increase the supply of the earth. On the other hand, what you're seeing is the degradation of the supplies which the earth is ready to give to you. The third thing he talked about was fossil fuel and the need for development of alternative fuels. And there is good news. There is a silver lining right there when I see recently in the Middle East, in the Gulf, that the cost of solar energy has gone down almost to 1.9 cents a kilowatt hour. That is remarkable because that then overtakes almost all the cost of energy development relative to fossil fuels, definitely. Then he talked of the reduction of tree cover, and that is where the billion tree tsunami, and you are all concerned about it, that is very important, and the degradation of the oceans. When I was the member of the National Assembly, I wrote a paper on the depletion of fish stock in the coastal regions of Pakistan. And you'll be surprised, I made a statement based on research done. I made a statement that 60 or 70% of fish stocks in the coastal waters of Pakistan has been totally destroyed, may not be recoverable. And that was a very alarming situation as far as I was concerned. And that Pakistan needs to do a lot to be able to regenerate those fish stocks. Then, ladies and gentlemen, what has been alarming for me is that when we talk about humanity, there are building blocks of humanity. Humanity depends on other species. And Stephen Hawking also talked about that. Although he's an astronomer and a mathematics specialist in mathematics, but he talked about the fact that we are destroying species. And what species are we talking about? We talk about species which are not only building blocks of what humanity is today, but species which are the structural requirements, like pillars to what humanity is today. The reduction in the number of bees, for example, the number of butterflies, moths, dragonflies, damselflies. In fact, those who have been reading, and I'm a very fond reader of science, you look at Scientific American and Science as a magazine, and over the last few years, all of them have talked about very serious figures in the depletion of extermination of species almost because of insecticides, pesticides, and change of habitat, and the fact that if these species are reduced, their productivity as far as the human productivity in agriculture and so many other issues will also be threatened. So that is very alarming, the reduction of insect population. Of course, the conservation of water is an issue. But we take pride in our ethos also. I remember, and we have to go back. We may not have to go back to the older civilizations or the indigenous method of, for example, of energy or of cooking to burn firewood. But we do have to go back over the centuries when human evolution take place. For example, today, the world is gradually coming around to less use of automobiles, more use of bicycles, more use of walking. And I remember only 100 years ago, I don't remember, but I was narrated that by my father. Only 100 years ago, people used to walk to school. 6 or 7 miles was not an issue. But today, even to come from the presidency, which is maybe about only 1 or 2 kilometers away, I come in a car and then I exercise separately in the morning. So rather than that being walking, being a part of my natural life, I have artificialized it and removed it from my natural way of living. So that is where humanity has to go back and treasure how it used to live. For example, I talked about, and that is where your muscles and your bones come from. You see, this structure, this building, for example, has concrete which is frozen, steel which is frozen. But that's not what the human body is. The human body is dynamic. Every steel means bone in my body, every calcium atom in my body changes in 5 years. So what was there 5 years ago is not there today. It is dynamic. If I exercise and walk more, my bones get stronger. If I exercise, my muscles, the bulk of my muscles increase. And if I don't, it decreases right away. And that has been evident as far as space astronauts have been concerned. When they come back, either they keep their muscles and bones or they don't. So therefore, what has become artificial today, that we need to do exercise and we need to compensate for the fact that we have cars, I think a natural way of living. For example, I stopped taking elevators in the assembly when I was here. I used to climb the stairs, walk down the stairs. Something you have to change. You see, the house has to change. When you talk about global warming or change, you start from your own family. My father used to tell me, don't waste water. How come your taps are open so much? You're wasting water. And this was 30, 40 years ago. And the Prophet ﷺ, who leads me in my guidance about how he lived, he said that you should conserve water if you are doing wuzu or ablution, even if you are at the sitting right next to a river. So you conserve water. So the need for conservation is a matter of waste, and you handle not doing it. You must make a commitment. Individuals, regions, politicians, governments, then international community has to make commitments from small steps to big steps. That is the need which you must go towards. The fact that we are a consumer society, we are somewhere around the road about 100 years ago, we started changing because the industrial revolution came up and the factories started manufacturing clothes and everything which you could use for a few days and discard and throw away. I think the world has started changing. Used clothes are being resold. In fact, in my family, it was a pleasure when somebody handed a shirt down to me. And if I handed down my shirt to my children, it was always a pleasure. Or to my cousins, it was always a pleasure. And that kind of conservation and thriftiness must come if you want to conserve what the world is all about. Ladies and gentlemen, we must understand, and coming from a background of medicine, sometimes it is difficult to convince the patient, especially patients who have mental issues, to convince the patient that you are sick. Today, I find it difficult that the world mentally is not taking it to that level that where it needs treatment. So it became a very big task for me to be able to tell the patient and his family that you need some psychiatric evaluation to manage this stress. I wish I could send some world leaders to psychiatrists to for them to have the impact of global warming, that it is there. And this train is running towards us in a very fast manner. So early recognition is very important. Early recognition is important. And whenever we do something, we first understand and convince ourselves there's an issue. Number one, that there is an issue. Then we geofence it or fence it, that this issue needs to be tackled in these areas. Then you come with a plan. And this is probably the end of what I am going to say. Then you come with a plan and look at the history of your past plans and the possibility of improving upon those plans and the fact what other nations did. So then you have a plan. But that's not the end of it. Today what I see mostly are plans ready to be adopted and taken up, but not enough commitment and the will to implement that plan. That's the fourth thing. But then you add the costs of that plan, because that is where governments get scared. For example, one of the reasons given for withdrawal of the United States from the Paris Accord is that the United States would get stuck with a huge bill, and that, as far as I'm concerned, countries which have had a major footprint in the decay of the situation, if they get stuck with a huge bill, that's something which is natural. Rather than Pakistan, which has no impact, we are not the effectors of global change, but we are the effectees. And all of a sudden, the cost of implementation is much higher on Pakistan society. For example, just imagine that we have enormous coal reserves. And this is an immediate problem. We have enormous coal reserves, but looking at global warming, we will be trying to restrict the usage of coal reserves. So therefore, countries and nations which have had a greater imprint or footprint on for global change must look at that in a different manner. So therefore, the cost of the plan and then the ability to implement it. The difference which I see, ladies and gentlemen, that we need to convert thinking. We need to convert the thinking of global leaders to they are taking steps. Rather than making a statement that they are not taking steps, I would say that every country is trying to take steps. But we have to increase that pace. We have to put our foot on the accelerator, that you have to change faster than what you imagine. We must reduce our consumerism. We must reduce our waste. It was something which was very common, and I used to quote that the amount of purchases done in some developing countries, about 40% of the stuff which was purchased, including the packing material, etc., was wasted within 6 months. We have to change that attitude. And like I said, we start from the children at home, we start from houses, we go into communities. And it was a pleasure when I was distributing, I had planned a 1 million tree tsunami for Karachi, and it was a pleasure distributing these plants for people to plant in their own houses. It was a pleasure, and there was an enthusiasm. So some outreach like that, in which the entire population gets involved beyond these structures, beyond these conferences, and these conferences are essential. And I must congratulate all those who organized this conference, especially to you, Mr. Minister, and IUCN itself, and our delegates who have come from abroad. I must congratulate the people who organized it, but your message needs to go much farther, and I promise that this government, and you heard the Prime Minister speak, he's a fan of trying to change the world as far as environment is concerned since I have known him. So when it was not an issue of votes, even when in Khyber Pakhtunkhwa he started the 1 billion tree tsunami, it was not an issue of votes, because the recognition of what he did is going to come into the next generation. So it's not a matter of getting a vote. It's a matter to be able to live tomorrow and give tomorrow to our children in a manner that they should be proud of what was left behind, rather than being in a crisis, rather than being afraid of the fact that humanity may not be around in the manner we know it. So thank you, ladies and gentlemen. Thank you very much for giving me the opportunity.